Hello and welcome to Unapologetics. I am Brently, and here I have a guest with me today. I have Callie Wright from the Queersplaining podcast.
Tis I, tis I.
How you doing? How was your holiday?
It was a little weird. My mom and my sister, I love them both dearly. We have great relationships, but they both live in Phoenix, and this is only the second year that's been a thing, and so it's weird to not spend Christmas with them. There's no like animosity or anything like that. It's literally just the distance thing, and like who knows, I may when it's hopefully if we ever make it safe to travel again. Hopefully maybe I'll go out to visit them. But it was honestly, it's just a little weird because of that. Other than that, not too bad. We went to my wife's family's place. And that was a smaller gathering. But it was cool, just, hang out and eat good food. So, overall, not too bad. I spent a lot of time working in retail in my early 20s, and working Black Friday at Best Buy not only kind of ruined me on humanity, but kind of ruined me on like the holiday season in general. So to be honest, like I don't really get that stoked about Christmas anymore. Just because I don't know. I think it broke for me once I felt like I was going to have to like physically break up a fist fight over a DVD player at some point.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And that's just like all I think about now when I hear Christmas music and I see like Christmas decorations and all that sort of stuff. I'm just like, yeah, this is all bullshit. It's a facade, right? Like people pretend like it's joy and togetherness and all of that, but it's like, and that's of course for a lot of people it genuinely is.
Sure, they just use it, it's like something that can be used for marketing, right? And just beat over its head.
And I'm to pay the bills. In addition to my podcast, I'm a freelancer. I have freelance clients, and most of them take the last 2 weeks of the year off. And so like, I'm not like completely without work to do, but I have a lot less work to do. And so that's been nice to just kind of get to relax and like hang out with my wife and hang out with my dog and work on some fun, like crafty projects and stuff. So yeah, I mean, altogether, not too bad. I'm not, I don't have as strong of feelings of love or hate for the season as a lot of people. I think I'm just kind of pretty indifferent to it in most ways.
Do you have to deal with any like religious family usually? Like, do you?
Nope. No. Well, I mean, I did, and that's part of the reason I don't deal with them at all anymore in life.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly, part of it is like my mom's side of the family. A lot of my cousins and uncles, I mean, they're fine people. Like I don't have anything against them. We just have zero in common, right? And it's so painful to try to force like a friendly interaction, Yeah. Like I don't want to talk to you about the weather. I don't care. And I don't find your job interesting. You probably don't find my job interesting. We don't have anything in common. Why are we hanging out together? Like it doesn't make any fucking sense.
It's like pretending that you're closer with people because they're related or whatever. I feel like that's so weird that we got to pretend that we're close. Yeah. Even if we, and we get there, we're like, so what you been up to? And they're like, working. We're like, what you been up to? Working. And that's literally the, most of the conversations I've had.
Yeah. But partially because of being trans, partially just because of like personality differences. I haven't spoken to my grandma in probably 6 years or so, and my aunt about that long. And so, holiday stuff I usually just spend with my wife's family, who are delightfully wonderful people. I mean, some of them are, religious of one kind or another, but they're not the like pushy over the top kind of religious people. And so it's not really a thing that comes up.
Right. They're not willing to make a scene sort of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, my aunt straight up told me that she would never accept the trans thing ever. And I was like, well, cool. So you're not going to be a part of my life anymore. All right. And with my grandma, it's a little more complicated than that. Like we could spend this whole podcast talking about that situation, but it was partially because of her being shitty about trans things, but also she's just kind of like a petty and shitty person. And kind of like all of that together, I was like, you know what? I just don't think I want you in my life anymore, which sucks, right? Like, when I was like 15, 16 and younger, I was her favorite grandkid. And she even told me, like, whispered in my ear, like, you're my favorite because you're the only one of my grandkids that ever goes out of their way to come see me. And even when I was like 16, 17, I had my driver's license, going to shows and stuff, like I would still go visit my grandma because I loved her to pieces. But yeah, that whole thing just went downhill, and it's sad, and it still kind of hurts. But I think I've really come to realize that, like, it doesn't have to feel good for it to be the right decision, right? Like sometimes you just have to do the thing that feels less bad because there's no option that feels good.
Right. Yeah. That's most of it. Most of the time, it seems, honestly.
Yeah. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. And I mean, most of that does come back to her, like super, super hardcore right-wing Pentecostal upbringing. When I came out to her as trans, it was like, well, you're my grandkid and I love you, but you know what the Bible has to say about that sort of thing. Right. And I mean, I wasn't in the mood for an argument, but I'm like, what does the Bible have to say about that sort of thing, Grandma? What does it have to say? Because, like, I mean, even as an atheist, like, I don't know, I've heard pretty convincing arguments that the Bible doesn't necessarily have to be anti-queer, anti-trans. I don't know. I'm not an expert. So I don't have a stance on that one way or the other. But like, I had caught her in a lot of things where she would say the Bible says something, and I knew very specifically that it did not say that thing.
Right.
And to her credit, she would be like, well, okay, I guess you got me there. She wasn't like totally, not willing to admit when she didn't know something. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of came down to the idea that, like, the relationship became a lot more pain and trouble than it was worth. Right. And it was like, everything that I was stoked about in life was what she hates, right? Like, my podcast isn't really an explicitly atheist podcast anymore, but when it started, it was. So obviously she wasn't stoked about that. Right. Not stoked about the queer thing, not stoked about the trans thing, not stoked about a lot of the other just sort of general life decisions that I made. Guarantee if she knew that I was married to another trans person, that she wouldn't be stoked about that. And so, like, why force a relationship with someone who hates all the important things in my life? You know what I mean?
Hates everything you love about yourself, kind of thing.
Yeah. And so, like, I mean, if she reached out to me and tried to apologize and tried to, like, mend fences or whatever, like, I'd probably take the call and I might, like, entertain a conversation. But I would have some pretty strong and strict boundaries about, like, if you believe that who I am is inherently wrong, I'm sorry, there's nothing you can say that's going to make me want to be a part of your life again. Right. And I didn't burn the bridge completely. I mean, I literally just, because I lived with her for a minute, and I'm grateful for the space that she gave me for that. But, like, the day that I moved out, I just said, like, bye, see ya. And I just haven't talked to her since. Wow, there was no like, fuck you, I'm done, get out of my life. There was, nothing like that. Right. So,
yeah.
But, in talking to my mom, because my mom still talks to her every once in a while, and talking to my mom, the conversations that my mom has had with her, it seems like she's only gotten worse through the last couple of years. So I think that one's probably over with. And it sucks and it's sad and it hurts sometimes, but it's still the right thing to do, I think.
Yeah. You gotta, you gotta look out for your own sanity here. You know? And sometimes those toxic relationships, if it's doing more harm to you than it is helping you, I always say, it's time to cut it.
Yep.
But that's I had like a similar situation. Like, I go into all completely religious spaces, so I just I do a lot of, like, okay, I do a lot of that, and that's the only way I know. I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and argue with people. I'm just going to have fun and and get mad that we're wearing masks all they want, but
and it's hard, like, and this is, I mean, part of the reason that I got into doing activism in the first place was that, like, I was an atheist, I was queer, I was trans, and, like, in the atheist world, I didn't really quite feel like I 100% belonged there. And then I would go into the queer community and it's, like, super overtly religious. And there are tons of wonderful people who will not deliberately make you feel left out for being atheist, right? Like, the totally, like, the most, like, non-judgy, non-pushy, non-preachy people, but they are, like, they interact with the world in a way that is very different from the way that I interact with the world. And it's just like, when I'm hanging out with those folks, I still just kind of feel like, okay, like a lot of these people that, they're kind of my people, but they're not entirely my people. And so like, and a lot of them are wonderful people that I love very much, but it's just, I never forget that, like, regardless of where I'm sitting, I'm kind of the odd one out and a little different. And that feels like weird and uncomfortable to differing degrees, like based on the environment that I'm in.
Wow, that's so interesting. So a lot of the queer community is overtly religious, you say, really?
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean, kind of part of my like podcasty activism origin story is that, like, because when I started getting involved in the atheist community, people were very welcoming, but there were just like not a lot of visible trans people. Like there were plenty of trans people around, but in terms of like the people who are on podcasts and YouTube and all of that sort of stuff, there just were not that many trans people. And so when I was in those spaces, it was like, I mean, it was usually a very like welcoming and affirming thing, but I was the trans person in the room, and it like, oh my God, I have questions, and all this sort of, like, I couldn't just like hang out and be a person,
Right.
And then, when I started getting involved in the queer community locally here, I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was a 17-year-old that committed suicide. And like, long story short, it was because her parents tried to force her into conversion therapy because she was trans. And that happened. It became like huge worldwide news, and it happened in Cincinnati, where I live. And so like the local community here was hit pretty hard by it. Even though, I mean, she wasn't super involved in the local community here because of her parents. But like a couple of my friends had gone to support group meetings that she had managed to get to once or twice, that kind of thing. And it was just like every place I went, we were just like completely ignoring the role that these like right-wing evangelical Christians played in this. Right. And just like, there wasn't even, we hear this a lot in like queer and trans affirming spaces where they will say like right-wing conservative Christians are doing the Christian thing wrong. Right. And I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't fucking care. I'm not a Christian. I don't care what the right kind of Christianity is, because either way, it's not a thing that I believe in.
Right.
But like, there wasn't even any of that. It was a whole lot of like, the specific line that like really set me off and became like my fucking villain origin story was somebody was like, I believe Jesus was a first responder on the highway that night. And like, I get what the person was saying, right? They were trying to be comforting and saying like, oh, she's with Jesus and she's happy and comfortable, whatever. And I'm like, so where the fuck was Jesus before she committed suicide?
Right.
Like, where right? Was in that equation? Like I get where you're coming from, but you don't understand how fucked up of a thing that is to say to someone. Like, Jesus just like watched this poor kid be tortured to the point where she committed suicide and then decided to fucking show up and do something about it. Like, if you believe Jesus is this all powerful dude, I'm hoping you're at least asking questions. Right.
Because if you can stop something and you have the power to, and you don't, I feel like, I mean, it's like the Spider-Man thing. Like, that's immoral. That's wrong.
Right. Well, and like, it's hard to question your deeply held beliefs, right? Like, I didn't even get the sense that we were grappling with like, oh, why would God allow this to happen? Because you hear that sometimes. And I can respect that at least. We're like, well, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know why that happened. I don't know why that is. I can have at least some respect for that. Yeah. But there just didn't seem to be any of that. Like, it just seemed to be a complete whitewashing of the whole situation. And so I was like, well, I guess I am going to be the annoying atheist in the queer community here. Like, and like, I don't want to be that person. I mean, I'm an atheist, right? But I that's just not a fight that I want to continually have with people. Right. Aside from the fact that like, I just felt continually like the queer community was just like not super thinking about the fact. I mean, statistically, the last time I looked, about 50% of the queer and trans community as a whole is non-religious of some kind. And the numbers break down like based on like the different words that you use, right?
Right.
But about in the last poll that I remember seeing, it was about half of the queer and trans community reported themselves to be like non-religious of some kind. And so like, if we're truly trying to be representative of the community, like those folks should at least factor into your thinking and your planning, right? Like, I'm not saying that, you know, my Christian friends shouldn't feel like it's for them too. My Muslim friends should feel like it's for them too. But there was just like zero interest in any of that, right? And I ended up getting into like a screaming match with someone over the fact that, you know, we were like planning the ceremony, and like literally the only sort of spirituality involved was Christianity. And I'm like, there's like a whole interfaith pride committee in the city where I live, right? Of like affirming clergy from all different religious faiths. And so I'm like, if we're trying to like truly represent the community, we should get them involved, right? Because like, as an atheist, I want to feel like that's a space for me. I don't want you to feel excluded as a Christian or a Muslim or whatever. I just want to feel like I'm a part of this too. And like, I want all of us to be a part of this. And that was just like such a big problem. And I was surprised by that, right? Like I was surprised by that. Like I really thought that when I got involved with the queer community, that the people who had a religious faith would at least be more chill about it. And a lot of them are, you know, I can't speak to statistics, right? Because I live in the world as an atheist. And so this is my, you know, anecdotal experience. But in terms of like, you know, the people doing like the organizing and the event planning and stuff like that, I will say over the last couple of years, that seems to have changed a little. Like I'm kind of soured on it, just, you know, from baggage from back then. It does seem to have gotten a lot better in recent years, thankfully, in terms of that. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of the whole reason that I started podcasting and stuff in the first place. Cause I was like, wow, I just don't feel like there were, you know, I didn't feel like there were voices at this specific intersection, you know, being amplified very loudly. And so I was just like, well, I guess I'm going to go do that thing.
Yeah. Cause when I got, you know, when I you know, it's just about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. You were it. You were the Gaytheist Manifesto was the main, you know, it's like the main place everybody pointed me, you know, to go learn about like the queer community and whatnot.
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't the only person. There was Tris Mamone was doing By Any Means podcast, and
yeah, that's right.
And there were a couple of other folks, but and I think Tris and I got started right around the same time. But you know, and then there was one person who was occasionally on podcasts and occasionally did talks, but was doing a lot more behind the scenes work. Right. And I just thought like, well, yeah, I'm an all right communicator. Like I should start a podcast because, you know,
right.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. No, that's awesome. And I feel like it is very helpful too. Cause like one of the main things that I think helps people be more, have more empathy for other people is hearing about other people's experiences, you know, in a very humanizing way. And you do a really good job of breaking, like on the show Queersplaining, you like, you know, the way that you draw this this landscape sort of and put everything in with the music, and it just, you know, it feels like one of those really good audiobooks, you know, where they really want you to feel,
that's a big compliment. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's I mean, that's deliberate, right? Like I that's the kind of podcast that I wanted to make, and so I spent a lot of time developing those skills and planning that out. So that's yeah, awesome. That took a lot of work, so it's nice to be affirmed. Thank you.
Oh yeah, no, you bet. Yeah, it almost reminds me of like The Daily or something like that. Like if like, you know, of course, I feel like a lot of your landscapes are actually a little better because they do, I think, they make fast work of it, I think, sometimes. So anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, a daily podcast, and also, I mean, you know, they have a team of how many dozens of people working on their show too. Where I am a solo producer. I am the only one making my show.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Isn't it?
It is. God, yeah. So many people don't realize how much work it is. People are very surprised. This is a 30-minute podcast episode, and it took me 35 to 40 hours to make.
Geez, see, that's like a week. That's a work week for most people, you know?
And I mean, it kind of is for me. Like, thankfully, thankfully I do enough on Patreon that I can treat Queersplaining like about half of a full-time job.
Oh, wow.
You know, it doesn't pay the bills on its own, but it gets me about halfway there, and I freelance for the rest. So I'm fortunate enough that I have that time to put to it. Because if I had to have a full-time day job on top of that, I don't know that I would be able to do that.
Right. Yeah. It makes it definitely, you know, that's like one of the main things I hear about, you know, when people talk about just the things that wealthy people have, time. It's time.
Yes.
You know, that's the main thing they have.
It's so funny. If you look at, one of my pandemic hobbies was reading like self-help books on how to like change habits and stuff like that. And I've since figured out that I actually have ADHD. So there's just like no amount of reading books that's going to completely get me there. I'm on medication now, which is wonderful. I'm very grateful for it. But like so much of it comes down to like, what's the secret to your success? I had enough money to hire people to do the shit I didn't want to do. That's what it comes down to for the most part, is right. I had enough money to hire a landscaper, a housekeeper, a chef, whatever, that freed me up time to do the stuff that I really want to do. Right. That like most of us like normal people don't have the money to do. That's the secret. A lot of the time, that's the secret. Or, you know, like a trust fund or an inheritance or something along those lines. Like most of the time when you find out what the secret is that.
Yeah, it's the starting seed money there that, you know, it's great. And you see a lot of these people, they'll sit there and fail upward. Like they'll do like 7 things and fail, and everybody else spends all their life to do like one of those things and hopefully does it, you know, well enough to survive off of it. You know, it's crazy. Drives me nuts. But so I did want to ask you this, because I've been hearing this word like crazy. Like if you are on any kind of you see any kind of right-wing clips or anything, wokeness is like the big scare. I mean, they treat it on Fox like it's a disease or something. Well, they don't care about those, so I guess
I was gonna say, yeah, they don't. It's weird how many metaphors just don't really work anymore.
Right. Exactly. But so what do you think about wokeness? What is it? What is it to you? And I think, what do they think it is, and so on.
So wokeness is not really a word that I use, because it's something that started in Black social justice culture. Right. There's a really great article that I will refer. It's a Vox by AJ Romano. And it was basically used as like, you know, stay woke, as in like stay aware and stay like, you know, keep your head on a swivel, watch out for yourself, that kind of thing. Right. And then it sort of evolved into, you know, sort of like I guess like a shorthand for leftist political ideology. And, you know, kind of a person who's like generally aware and a social justice advocate and all of that sort of stuff. And then, as happens with a lot of words like that, a lot of white people started using the word incorrectly and out of context. And then, you know, the right got a hold of it, and it's just like a whole thing that's very different from what it started as. And so I would encourage you to Google Vox, what is woke. It's a very, very good article that goes into the history of, you know, where the word came from and all of that. But yeah, I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. And to be honest, like anyone who uses that word uncritically is someone at least in that context, because you know, in the social justice advocate circles that I run in, a lot of people have stopped using that word the way that it was originally meant to be used, because it's like you can't, you know, it's like using the word triggered in a mental health context. Like you can't use that word to mean what it actually means anymore, because people misunderstand what you say. People misunderstand what you mean when you use it. Right. And so, you know, in that sort of context, if, you know, in political commentary and that sort of stuff, I've just kind of stopped taking people seriously when they use it. Because it's just like anything else. It's just like, you know, people calling people communist or socialist when you don't know what communism or socialism actually is.
Right.
It's like calling Democrats leftist, which is fucking hilarious because Democrats are not leftists. It's certainly not extreme radical leftists. You know what I mean?
Middle of the road at best.
It's really just the way that it's used in political commentary now is it's just a scary buzzword that people will use to paint anything that they don't like with. It's a classic political tactic, right? To take something that's simple, a word or a phrase, and just inherently tie it to something you don't like to make that thing unpalatable and make that word unpalatable, right? It's a propaganda tactic, and unfortunately, it's a very effective propaganda tactic, especially when people don't realize that's what's happening. So these days in political discourse, if people use that word uncritically, I just kind of stop taking them seriously. Because if you ask people like what it means, they often will not be able to tell you.
Right. There's no specifics, there's just like, I've heard a lot of times it's when like leftism goes too far. And I'm like, well, when is that? Where's the line at then?
Yeah. Is it like when we think that like people generally should have health care? Is it when we think like people shouldn't be homeless? Like what is, where is it too far when we're like, people deserve to like live and stuff? That's what it comes back to, right? Is it's taking these like very reasonable propositions in that like you shouldn't be at risk of dying because you can't afford healthcare.
It's insane.
But they take that concept and reframe it as something that they can make sound just wild and unpalatable, and that's how they slowly move the Overton window to the right by just like treating this very reasonable concept as if it's something just so patently absurd.
So crazy. It's like Ron DeSantis just passed down here in Florida. I'm down in Florida, and
the Stop Woke Act.
Yes,
that's
it was insane. And he was saying that like it, that basically wokeness is when you say everybody's racist, and they say that kids are racist at 3 years old and then are a full racist by the time they're 6 or something. Like none of it made any sense. I'm like, are you referring to the doll test? Like, I don't even know where he's at with that,
Well, it's like the ultimate expression of the those like chain emails you get from your uncle, right?
Yeah.
That like it started with like, hey, you know what? Like we know black kids start experiencing racism pretty early, so we should probably start teaching white kids that's a bad thing pretty early. It starts there. And it ends with like Joe Biden's gonna put white kids in work camps, like it. It's a big game of like bad faith telephone.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It really is, and it's just, and it's like you said too. I feel like it just, and now I mean CRT I think is the same way. It's like just whatever they don't like, that they can throw in that basket. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah. And I mean, ask any of those people to explain what critical race theory actually is, and not a single one of them can actually tell you what it is.
Right. Or if you get the really clever people too, they'll be like, well, I know that it's, this graduate level program, college course, whatever. But, there are basics of it that, are being taught to children and, or just certain tenets within it are being taught, because they don't like the idea of just recognizing that different people are different and would be offended by different things. Like you can't do that. No, if it's offensive for one person, it's that's it's just
well, it's the sort of exceptionalism that our culture is steeped in, right? Like the idea that we're so great and wonderful, and like all of the best ideas in the world started here, and that's like our heritage and all of that. And people, this might be bad. But I think a lot of it, honestly, is that people have so little of actual substance to wrap their identities around, about them as people, that they wrap their identities around this like American exceptionalism mythology, right? That of course is also steeped in a very specific brand of Christianity. And that becomes like who these people are. And the thought that those things might be deserving of critique or might be fundamentally flawed in some way, right? Like there's no way that those folks will examine that critically, because it's immediately, because that thing is such an integral piece of their identity, it becomes an attack on them personally. Right. And so there's no desire or ability to engage with that in a way that uses critical thought of any kind.
Right. Yeah, because I mean they're stuck with that. I mean that almost forced cognitive dissonance that everything that's happened in the past was great. We're the greatest nation. That always has to be true. It's almost like God being good in the Bible. He always has to be good in the Bible, no matter what the words on the page say. Same thing with America. America's always good.
Well, and I think there's a tiny bit of a general human propensity to prefer simple things. We like easy answers. We like things to be uncomplicated. Because I mean, there's a leftist version of this too, right? Like the leftist version of this is American imperialism is bad. Therefore, anyone who doesn't like American imperialism is good. And then you find people defending like North Korea. Right. Okay. Which is like I can definitely say that the United States should not engage in imperialism against North Korea. That doesn't mean I think North Korea is a good place and that the government is good, right? And so there is a leftist version of that tendency. There's just, I don't know if there are fewer of those people or they're just not as loud or what. But it's the general want to be like this thing good, this thing bad, this thing bad, this thing good, and the two are always congruent with one another, right? Like if America bad, all of America's enemies are good, and vice versa. And that's just like the world doesn't work like that, guys. It really doesn't.
You're absolutely right too, because like we hate complicated things. Like I don't like complicated things. Like I'd much rather, and I'll almost find my brain just doing it automatically. Oh, it's probably this, and you're like, oh, I don't even know that. I don't know if it's that, And it's just,
I mean, it comes back to the idea that like, when in the formative centuries of human existence, right, the ability to make a very quick decision about whether or not something is a threat was a survival tactic, right? Like if you don't err on the side of this thing I'm not sure of is a threat, you're more likely to die. And so like there is a bit of human instinct there, and that doesn't make it okay to act like that. Like it doesn't make it excusable, but I do think that's the reason. I just think that's something that like we don't talk enough about, how people have to be aware of that instinct and figure out the right times to question that instinct.
Right. Yeah. Because I was just listening to it, and it was like listening to a thing about psychology, a college course, and they were saying that you can go both ways. You can accidentally do a false positive, and then you can do it in reverse too, and not take evidence when it is something that's it was really interesting.
yeah, it's hard.
But yeah, and that was like what they were talking about, like just like evolutionary. That's what it was. Evolutionary psychology. That's in the place it was in.
Yeah, which like I don't know a lot about it, but I know a lot of smart people think it's bullshit, and so my guess is that it probably is, but I don't actually know. I just know a lot of very smart people that I respect in a lot of other ways think that evolutionary psychology is bullshit. I don't actually know. I don't have an opinion because I don't know enough about it. But
right? Yeah, I it's the introduction to psychology. So I don't know.
Oh, okay, right on.
I'm just starting, but yeah, it is fascinating. I think that a lot of the stuff is left over from a lot. I think it seems pretty clear with the like tribalism. We could see like almost plain as day, like how like we are tribal beings, or like we.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I really don't like using that word to describe things that are bad, right? Because a tribe is sort of like the original human social organizational unit, right?
Right.
But when we say tribal in modern society, usually that means it's something bad, right? And I think it's really important that we question that impulse, because there are indigenous peoples today that still use those words to describe their social organizational structures, right? And so I think that's a bad word to use for that, because I don't even think it's the same thing, right?
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I really don't. I think the instinct is similar, right? Like the idea that we need to find our social group and we need to like find people whose interests are similar to ours. And I don't mean interests in like other people that like Star Trek. I mean interests as in like my survival equals your survival, like that kind of thing.
Right.
But I think in modern sort of colonialist culture, I think that it is a very different sort of instinct than the original sort of like human social need. I think they maybe come together in the same place, but I don't think they are quite the same thing. And I think I really don't like using that word to describe it for that reason, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, I've kind of racked my brain about, because I always felt like it sounds weird too, just the way that, like you said, that it can be interpreted different ways. But I don't know what would be a good word to.
I like using
in
groups and out groups.
Oh, okay, yeah, that could work.
Because your in group is basically like the people who are part of whatever circle you have, right? So like, my wife is my in group, my best friends are my in group. The stranger that I see on the street is probably an out group. I don't really know for sure. But it's, the kind of like the difference between like the people who you feel like are your people versus the people who aren't.
Right.
But also like our society makes it really, really hard to suss that kind of thing out, right? Because our society really is based on the idea, the idea that like the ideal thing is the nuclear family, right? Like husband, wife, 2.5 kids, white picket fence, that whole thing.
Right.
Whereas instinctually humans kind of generally want to be part of communities of one kind or another, right? But the way that we've built our society is kind of at odds with that instinct. And so there's a conflict of like, how do you find those people? How do you interact with those people? How does that all work? Because our society is kind of set up like in fundamentally the opposite way than most of us want to like organize ourselves.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Okay, I like that. I'm going to use that from now on, in group and out group. that does, I feel like, explain it a lot better, and it kind of it puts you in the middle of it too. So it's like my in group or their in group. It, like that way you can, it makes a lot more sense actually.
Well, yeah, and I mean it's an accurate way of explaining experience, right? Because like as much as any of us would like to believe, there's no such thing as objectivity. Like we all are experiencing the world through the lens of our own, of our own awareness. And we can like do our best to try to get outside of that. But fundamentally, everything that we know is filtered through the lens of our experience in one way or another. And so, just makes sense to me anyways.
Yeah, I like that. So another term that I've been hearing lately is GC.
Yeah.
So tell me about this, like what that means. I just hear it. I know it's a negative term.
It depends. What you talk to.
Group you're in, right?
It stands for gender critical, and basically what it really comes down to is they hate trans people. It's supposed to be like a more politically palatable version of a TERF, a trans exclusionary radical feminist. But generally speaking, there are folks who like either don't believe that transness exists or believe that transness is a mental illness of some kind, or that it's a delusion or something along those lines, that like transness is not simply another way that people are. It is an aberration, something not to be embraced or accepted, but something to be fought against.
Right. It's very similarly as gayness was treated, like what we were talking about with the conversion.
Oh yeah. And it's really funny, like some of the super like rad femme type people are like forming alliances with right-wing people who fought against gay rights, like, 20 years ago, right? Like, these are like radical feminist organizations that are filled with lesbians, and they're teaming up with people on the right simply because like they both hate trans people. And it's the same shit over and over again. Like, if you look at all of the arguments, all of the fear mongering, it's basically the same exact thing.
Yeah, that's sad.
It's sad and it's terrifying. Right. I honestly, I'm in a relatively privileged position in life, right? Like, I don't live paycheck to paycheck. I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but like, if I stopped making money tomorrow, I could probably make it 6 months before things got really, really dicey.
Right.
All that's to say, like, I'm in a generally pretty secure position in life. There's not a ton that scares me. I've fought with cops on the streets and protests, all of that sort of stuff. Like, that doesn't bother me. But TERFs genuinely fucking terrify me.
Wow. Really?
I have seen them bully and harass people completely off the internet.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's bad. And they do that kind of thing very deliberately, targeted, strategic, and they do it in groups. They have message boards, and I think they even have like Facebook. Either Facebook has to chase them down to chase them out of Facebook groups, or Facebook allows them to keep them. It's been a long time since I've like did a deep dive into all of that. But yeah, I mean, they organize around the idea specifically of like targeting harassment, directed harassment at people. It's not just they're like, in the government, like fighting for bad laws and that kind of stuff. Like, they really do go after people on the internet to like bully and harass them and try to get them. I mean, in some cases, like legitimately encouraging suicide. And yeah, it's fucking horrifying.
My God, that's like what? See, you have to really, I mean, you have to really hate somebody or a group of people to put that much effort into the organization of all of that, and then just doing it day in and day out. That's just, wow. You're right. That is terrifying. Just that thought alone, that they would hate that much to go to those links. That is disgusting.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's a fun existence. Like, fucking God, life is short and terrifying and scary. Fucking go watch some TV that you enjoy. Yeah. Like, find a fucking hobby, guys.
Guitar, learn to play it or something, man. Damn.
Yeah.
Like, jeez, that's insane. Wow. Yeah. So, and the crazy thing is, it's like, it seems like they're getting a lot of validation from people like Dave Chappelle. You got J.K. Rowling and Richard Dawkins. That's what freaked me out. Honestly, when I saw the Dave Chappelle special, the fact that he was just so casually saying over and over again that he's a transphobic person. And he was just like, it's just normal, it's normal. Like, and I'm just going to keep repeating it and kind of take the badness. You know how people do that? They like try to get rid of the negative outlook on a word.
And that, I mean, that very specifically is how a lot of this has happened. People with big profiles say stuff like that, receive basically no real consequences. I mean, people say mean shit about them on the internet and write blogs and make YouTube videos. But like, these people still have careers. They're still rich. They still have platforms that include millions of people. Right. So like, in terms of like real discernible real life consequences, they face basically none. And so they keep doing it. And it, they play into the idea that they're a victim of, coming back to, weaponizing terms, right? Like cancel culture mobs, right? Like people talking about like, oh, I'm going to say a thing I'm not allowed to say on my Netflix special that I got paid $10 million for. Look at how much I've been canceled. I've got a Netflix special. Like I got canceled into $1 million book deal. And people buy it.
Yeah.
People fucking eat it up.
I almost feel like it's just lazy too. Like it was just the comedy wasn't done at all. It seemed throughout the whole thing, and it's like, oh, if I'm just done doing good jokes, I can just say this thing, and then I'll get all over the news too, and I'll get all the same publicity I would have gotten plus some, without even having to be that funny, you know. Which is the point of the goddamn thing.
Yeah, and there is, and I'm not specifically knowledgeable enough to talk about it in detail, but like there has been social science research that shows like those sorts of things do lead directly back to real world harm to trans people, right? Like it's not just like, oh, I watched a Netflix special and Dave Chappelle hurt my feelings, right? But like that sort of stuff really does feed into negative cultural perceptions that eventually works its way back to people perpetrating violence against trans people directly, people in government deciding to pass bad laws, right? We've seen this like flurry of anti-trans legislation in a bunch of different states in the U.S. It's a pretty scary thing.
And it normalizes the bullying too, like all that. So I mean, that's the people look up to these people, and it's like they don't realize how much responsibility they have when they're on a stage talking.
Well, I think they do, or at least some of them. I think, especially with fucking wizard author, I think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I remember specifically her saying like one of the reasons she has decided to go full ham is because she recognizes the influence she has, and she thinks that this is like such an important fight to fight.
Wow.
It's fucking, it's pretty bad.
I don't understand. They wouldn't lose anything. I'm just so confused by
it's fear. It's people were afraid of gay people, and now that, and I don't mean to imply that it's super easy to walk through the world as a queer person now, but to a certain degree, if you're gay, it's normalized-ish,
right?
In certain places, you know what I mean? Like, and that's. Like I said, I don't mean to imply that like being gay is now just like not a big deal in society, because that's clearly not the fucking case. But I think there's enough social awareness now where it's like pretty obvious that gay people are just like a threat to fucking no one. It's like we have to find a new group of people to fearmonger about. And it's, they're gonna recruit our kids. Specifically a lot of the anti-trans rhetoric is about how like if you're assigned male at birth and you say like, oh, I'm a trans woman, people will say like, you're not a trans woman, you're just gay. And because you're now living your life as a trans woman, we have now lost a member of the gay community. Right. Okay. And so you see a lot of that discourse as well. Like, if, somebody comes out as non-binary, that's one fewer lesbian to fight the lesbian fight. You know what I mean? Like it's the idea that like, we as trans people are a threat to this other established group. And that if I could just be convinced that I wasn't actually trans, that I would be a part of that group and therefore make that group stronger. And it's hard to tell how much of that is good faith, right? Like, I'm sure there are people who legitimately believe that, terrible as it is. I'm sure there are people who like really do truly believe in their heart of hearts that that's true. There are probably some people who use it as a convenient political argument, right? Because they know it's like, well, we can fearmonger against this group. It's bullshit, but I don't care that it's bullshit because it works. Right. And I don't know what the spread is on that, right? Just like I'm sure, abortion was turned into a political football specifically because they knew they could weaponize it as a political football, right? But now I'm sure there are plenty of anti-abortion people who legitimately think they're trying to save babies' lives. The people who decided to make an abortion a problem knew exactly what they were doing by creating that social division, right? And so like it's hard to know what the spread is. Like, how many people really believe that they're trying to save babies' lives, and how many people really just understand that this is just like something that was made up for the culture war, I don't fucking know.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like a lot of these people, especially on the right, it always reminds me of like the healthcare debacle, right? Because it's like a lot of them, they don't want extra things for themselves because they already have everything. So what do they want? They want other people to not have something, right? Because they're like, I deserve all the stuff that I already have. I can't really get much more than I got, but they don't deserve this thing, and that's why the healthcare needs to be worse for these poors over here. Whatever, whatever. But it seems like they're doing a lot of that with the queer community.
I think it's entitlement, right? It's people who are born with gobs of privilege, people who are born with a ton of money, that sort of stuff. They are taught their entire lives that this is their birthright, or that they earned this, they deserve this. This belongs to them. When in reality, it's a lot of it is like luck of circumstance or the outright exploitation of other people that gets you there, right?
Right. 9 times out of 10.
So it's I deserve this because I worked hard. You, as a poor person, obviously did not. And if you get that thing, it somehow diminishes me.
Right.
Which is I cannot fucking fathom living your life with that kind of an attitude. Because because I even insurance is a pain in the ass, but I have insurance, and a lot of the people that can't access healthcare, I would love for them to have what I have. Even as pain in the ass as it is, I would gladly pay an extra couple of $100 a year in taxes to, for poor people to have the healthcare that I have, right? Because I like having healthcare. I know that if I break my ankle walking down the stairs, there's a hospital here that's going to take care of me. It'll be a financial hit, but it won't be devastating. Even that's an improvement from where so many people are. And I can't fathom the idea of saying that I deserve that, you do not, so fuck you.
Right.
It's the idea of scarcity, right? The world, and that's the thing that capitalism teaches us, is scarcity, right? And in order to maintain control, you have to convince people that resources are scarce. And we don't really live in a world where resources are scarce anymore. Resources are hoarded and locked up.
Yeah.
And
dumped in the ocean.
If we had access to those resources, the people in power would have less power. And so it's not a threat to their well-being, it's a threat to their power. But because capitalism, a lot of people are convinced that those are the same thing. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Like humanity in general, we crave a sense of safety and security, right? I can say with relative confidence that basically every human goes to bed wanting to wake up tomorrow feeling a little bit more safe and secure than they did the night before, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And because imperialism, because capitalism, we've been convinced that the urge to be safer and more secure is the same thing as the urge to maintain and hoard wealth, and they are not the same thing, right?
Yeah, you're right, because it's the justification that's used constantly by these people.
Yeah, and the thing is in the world we live in, that's true, right? The richer you are, the more generally secure you are in life.
Oh yeah.
But that's a decision we have made as a society. That's nothing inherent to humanity.
Right. That's a good point. It's a sort of an agreed upon, mutually. Yeah, that's true.
It's capitalism, baby.
Yeah, that's it all day. That's so funny. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy that it works that way. Okay. One last thing I got to ask you about. Now, I think this has something to do with you were I want to say you were on a Q&A with the Puzzle and a Thunderstorm guys.
That's a thing that happened.
Okay, it was a while ago.
Yeah,
it was a good minute ago, but I just remember hearing you answer this question, and you said it was what is the thing that you're embarrassed? What's the type of music that you're embarrassed to tell people that you like, but you really do like it, right?
Yeah.
And you said Christian hardcore and metal bands.
Yeah. So, and I will caveat this by saying I don't I don't have guilty pleasures, right? I think it's really important. You just fucking, I mean, unless it's like legitimately harmful shit. Like,
right. Yeah.
I don't believe in feeling guilty for enjoying a thing, for the most part.
Right.
Obvious exceptions, of course, but like for the most part, you know, if you like the music you like it, and just fucking own it. But I will say, like, the music that I get the most side eye when I tell people I like it. In fact, I get more of a reaction to this than I get when I tell people like, I actually really like the last Taylor Swift album.
Oh wow.
But yeah, Christian metalcore and hardcore. And the reason for that is in the early 2000s, there was just a very specific brand of metal and hardcore, and all of the bands in that genre were Christian bands, and they all kind of like influenced each other, and they all sort of came from this similar like small group of metal and hardcore bands, and they just happened to all be Christian bands. And there were like non-Christian bands that had similar styles, but there was a very specific kind of things that like really existed mostly in that scene. And it's what I grew up on. So specific bands, As I Lay Dying, which is one a lot of people have probably heard about, but of course Tim Lambesis tried to have his wife killed. He's a piece of shit. Fuck him.
Yeah, that was crazy.
But I did grow up listening to them, and they were a Christian band. And I mean, I don't know if they still profess to be or not. I do know one of the things he sort of like tried to hint that he had lost faith in God, and that might have been one of the things that led him to killing his wife, because as we know, atheists notoriously try to have people killed. You're
bound to do it eventually.
It's the whole thing. Living Sacrifice, Zayo, Norma Jean, and Norma Jean is a band a lot of people are familiar with. They used to be called Ludacris.
Yeah, I remember Ludacris.
Yeah, and I got into them. I got into them right after they had changed their name, but before they had released an album as Norma Jean. So they were still playing all of the songs off the Ludacris record.
Right.
And oh my god, that was actually like my first hardcore show. It was
really
oh my god, it was incredible. It was 2001, I think.
Right. I was gonna say that I remember being into it right around that time, because that's when I was going to all those shows, and it was about
absolutely incredible. Yeah, there's a band called Anna Avea that was really good. It was like a Swedish metal band called Extol. It was really good.
Oh man, they were so good.
So good.
I still listen to them sometimes.
Yeah, outlandishly good.
That and Zayo, I think probably, like you said, Zayo is probably one of them. And I actually, my sister got to meet him. I don't know if you ever heard of Under Oath.
Oh yeah. Right?
They went to my church. They were from
really?
Chapel that I went to. I grew up, we played with them a couple times. And
famously, not really a Christian band anymore either.
Right? No, they're not. I mean, there's hardly any original member. I think there's one person that's the same. From back then, because they used to be super death metal,
Yes, and I as a matter of fact, I think I bought one of those albums because this was like, when like you still had to special order those records, because this was like the internet was around, but you couldn't buy everything on the internet yet. Right. And so I would go to and so like I would go to record stores and I would special order. I special ordered the Ludacris CD, I special ordered the Living Sacrifice CD.
That's how you had to do it. I had to order it from the record store. Had to get it.
And I think it was when Bless the Martyr Kiss the Child came out, the first Norma Jean record.
Right.
There was an Under Oath record there, and I was like, oh, I've heard good things about them. But it was like one of their old albums when they were like super like death metal-y. And then later on I heard what was it? They're Only Chasing Safety. That was like their first really big one, and I was like, this is not the same band, I don't think.
I thought I ended up at the wrong show. Like one time, Sue was like, I was like, oh yeah, man, I grew up with those guys. We went to see them, and I'm like, they're like, that's them, and I'm like, no, it's not. You're kidding with me, right? Like I thought everybody was messing with me. Turned out, no, that was them. That's
Haste the Day was another big one. Haste the Day. Oh man, I saw. So they're from the Indianapolis area, which is close to me. I'm in Cincinnati. And I went to Indianapolis to see Living Sacrifice when they were doing, at the time they said it was their farewell tour. It turned out not to be, but that's what they said at the time. And Haste the Day was opening for them as a local band. They hadn't been signed to Solid State yet. And so like they just had this EP of like 6 songs. and they played, and I was just like, I mean, I've definitely seen opening bands before that I really liked, but generally it's tough for me to really enjoy a band live that I don't already know the music for. Right. Like I'll see them and I'm like, oh man, these guys are really good. I still don't enjoy the show a super lot. Then I go and get really familiar with their music, and then I come back and see them again, and it's incredible, right?
Right.
But these guys, I fell in love during their show. It was just like, holy shit! Like these guys are something special. There is like they're going to be huge. This is going to be a whole thing. Right. And it was and I think at the time they had actually already signed to Solid State, but they hadn't announced it yet.
I see.
Because I was talking to their singer, and he said something about like, oh yeah, like big stuff's happening or whatever. And so I got to see them. That was before their first album came out, so that was really cool. And then there were some like non-Christian bands from that era that I was into. I really liked 18 Visions. They were really good. I actually saw this is one of my favorite concert flexes is I saw Avenged Sevenfold with 18 Visions in a like 100 cap venue where the fucking AC was broken in Cincinnati long fucking time ago. The very first album they ever put out was called Sounding the Seventh Trumpet. It never got popular. And it was I forget what the album was after that. The one where they really, really blew up. But it was, no, it was before that. There was another one. I don't remember the name of the album off the top of my head, but it was like, they were not, I mean, they were like popular in the underground metal and hardcore scene.
Right. For that area or that. Scene.
But yeah, they were touring. It was, I think it was 18 Visions, Throwdown. No, Throwdown didn't play that show. It was 18 Visions and Avenged Sevenfold. And I mean, it was 100 cap shithole venue, the shitty PA, AC was broken. I think there's a makeup shop in the spot where that venue is now. It was wild. It was wild. That was a great show.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh yeah, no, that's great. That's so funny because like, growing up, I was homeschooled and everything, and so like, it was around that time I was becoming a teenager. Was right around 2000. Well, I think I turned 18 in 2003, so it was right around that time. And I could go to they would only let me go to the State Theater if it was for like a Christian band, but like Living Sacrifice, like we went and saw Living Sacrifice, and it was just phenomenal.
I still rock out to the Hammering Process. Like it's still one of the heaviest albums ever written, and it's like, it's so cringe. Like they released the last album they put out, The Infinite Order, I think. They actually had a song about evolution called Organized Lie, and I was just like, oh, come on, guys. But yeah, I mean, I still go back and jam the Hammering Process. I still think it's one of the heaviest records ever written.
Oh yeah, I think, what was it? The Hand of the Dead, I think it was.
Hand of the Dead.
So great.
We're just like, what the hell are you doing? Right. Like, scared my dog.
Like, hey, if you knew the song, y'all, you'd be doing the exact same damn thing. Yep. That's so great. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. This was
absolutely. It was a joy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So do you want to do a plug for Queersplaining?
Oh, yeah. I make a podcast called Queersplaining. You can find it in all of the podcast places. It's a queer and trans storytelling show. Find somebody cool and interesting to tell a story about something important that happened to them. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's tragic. But basically, the big media outlets generally do a really bad job telling queer and trans stories, and so I like to tell queer and trans stories in a good way.
That's awesome. It really is really good. A great show.
Thank you.
But thanks again. So we do a sign off where I basically say who we're going to say fuck off to, and then we both say fuck off together. Okay.
Oh, love this. Who are we going to say fuck off to?
All right. So what do we say to the haters, discriminators, and masturbator shamers?
Fuck off. Yeah.
That was awesome.
I enjoy me some masturbating.
That's right. Yeah, it was so funny. I did that sign off, and then we found out later that like not masturbating was like something that white supremacists like do and like push in their little group.
Oh yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's perfect. All
Fuck,
right, good.
there's just nothing fun about that lifestyle. Fuck are they doing? Like,
right. How lame. God. Jeez. Yeah, I'd probably be wanting to hurt everybody too if I wasn't. All right. Take it easy, y'all. Thanks for listening.